If you find the content in this podcast challenging, you can head to beyondblue.org.au or lifeline.org.au. Take care of yourselves.
Suicide is something we often whisper about.
Yes.
And I feel like it needs to be spoken about. And the truth is every suicide devastates the community of the person who lived in it. I didn't leave you because I didn't love you. I left you because I lost the love for myself. He didn't feel like his life had enough worth to continue living. You know, I had Ludovico Einaudi playing, and I had all my watercolors spread out. And 4 hours later, I would just come out of this place that had felt so transformative, and that sense of like artistic realization is also just incredibly fulfilling. This is correct. This is exactly where you're meant to be. This is exactly what you're meant to be doing. And sort of when you find your intuitive sense of why you're on this planet and you can access that, it just becomes so purposeful and so meaningful in your endeavor to realize it. Hi, my name is Ryan Abramowitz, and this is the Good People Podcast.
It's a tip of the cap, it's a pat on the back, it's a smile from ear to ear. They're the good people from round here.
Welcome to another episode of the Good People Podcast, brought to you by In Other Good News. My name is Andy, and on this podcast I get to talk to good people of all shapes and forms. Today is a first. We're going to tackle something today that is a little bit challenging, and we're going to see how one person used a situation that happened to them to create something that's beautiful and also very useful for others. So he is a author, he is an illustrator, and he's a freelance creative, and he has created a book which he is going to launch in coincidence with Suicide Awareness Day, World Suicide Awareness Day, and which is based on experiences that he has had himself. So I'd like to welcome to the show Ryan Abramowitz. Welcome.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. I heard about the book and the book launch, and I thought what you're doing is pretty special, and so we should share this story because it is special and it is also important. It's a really important topic. So I guess right off the top, let's talk about what is it, and then we'll dig into why you're doing it.
Can I?
Yeah, you can grab it. Yeah, so we've actually got, for those who are listening to this, we've actually got the book here on the desk. Do you want to tell us what it's called?
Yeah, so the book is called Elegy for an Elephant.
Mm-hmm.
And an elegy is a lamentation or a dedication or a tribute for one who's died.
Yep.
And the book envisages my family's journey to come to terms with and process the loss of my father through suicide. And it takes all of our characters and expresses them in an anthropomorphic language, which is through animal allegories.
Right.
And so my dad, being a gentle giant, very statuesque, a beautiful nature, is the elephant in the room.
Yep.
And I'm a very oceanic soul, deep reverie for marine life. And so I'm a whale, Wonder the whale.
Right. So that's the animal that you feel reflects who you are.
I'll show you Wonder. I'll show you Wonder.
So you've in this particular book, you've described your family members.
Yes.
In animal form.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's me.
Okay. So you're
that's my self-portrait.
There we go.
And then I've got two twin sisters.
So what we're looking at here is we've got a picture of a little whale there, and it looks like it's reaching out and touching the trunk, if I'm reading this correctly.
Yeah, well, the spirit of my dad having an imagined conversation.
Sure.
In a nebulous space between the sea and the stars.
There you go.
And then we have, so I've got, as mentioned, twin sisters.
Yep.
And so they both love birds and they both resonate with birds.
Yep.
So we have The one is a swallow, a golden swallow, whose
Yep.
name is Grace.
Uh-huh.
Her real name is Gina.
Yep.
And then we have another bird. That's Hope, a emerald pigeon.
Yep.
And this is Nicole.
Okay. So what you've illustrated your family members
And
sorry.
so and I'll get in trouble if I don't
Oh, yes.
introduce my mom,
You introduce your mum, yes.
who is the lioness.
Uh-huh.
I suppose also being a woman born in South Africa has also chosen to resonate with another animal of the African plains.
Uh-huh. Well, that's beautiful. And it's
Yeah.
all like, if you could sit, so of course, if you are listening to this, you're not getting to see the visual extravaganza that we've got going on here. But you wrote and illustrated this.
Yeah.
And its release is you're releasing this now in conjunction with World Suicide Awareness Day.
Correct.
Which, for those who don't know, September the 10th, I believe.
September the 10th.
In fact, a bit exciting for you. You're actually sitting here nervously waiting for a call because you've got a big shipment of books coming.
Yes. Yes.
Very important that they get delivered.
Yeah, we've got a shipment, or as I call it, the herd of 1,620 elephants.
Yes, and they're all turning up in boxes.
They're turning up in boxes. I received a advance of them 3 weeks ago that was airflown.
Yep.
And went to some book reviewers, but ahead of the release, and there's pre-orders now.
Yep.
Anxiously waiting for
I can tell you're
to
anxious.
arrive.
He's very anxious. So right now, as we're recording this interview, Ryan is waiting on a big shipment, and so at any point, if there's an abrupt end to a question, it's because you're getting a phone call from the delivery guy. So
my cortisol levels will go down after.
Yeah, we can relax once the books are delivered. So let's talk about the book. It's not just a book. I mean, a lot of people write books, but this book has a lot of purpose behind it. And this is the part of the story that really resonated with me, was that you told me that you wrote this as a way of dealing with the news and the loss of your father.
Yeah.
And of course, you're a creative. You're an artist, and of course, you've written and illustrated all of this in it, which is beautiful, beautiful work in there. But it has so much meaning. I want you to explain to me what you found the experience to be like after it happened for you in your healing process, which obviously leads us to why you wrote.
Yeah. I was studying in Copenhagen at the time when I found out my dad passed. I was on an exchange placement from Melbourne Uni at Copenhagen Business School.
Sure.
So obviously I was living abroad, and I was more removed from the happenings of my family circumstances, which I was probably protected by from my mum and sisters. And I received a call from my sister on the 20th of May, 2016. And, Scandinavia typically has a very maritime climate, and it almost felt like a whiteout. I remember looking out the window and it was just white clouds. And so very heavy, and my sister called to tell me our dad had passed. And it's hard to process the gravity of that.
Yep.
And to sort of reconcile what that means.
Was that a shock for you?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I knew he'd been battling depression, but
the news is always difficult.
Yeah. And I think because it's too significant to necessarily comprehend in that moment in time. Next thing, I had a few of my friends from school calling me and being like, "We've booked you a flight. Can you get to the airport in 4 hours?" I remember thinking, I've got to go return my library books.
Oh, yeah. You
can't
just up and go.
No, and then I
That's
remember
difficult.
thinking, oh wow, because I accumulated so much clothes when I was in Copenhagen. I was thinking, oh well, I've got an extra flight to get home to to ship my clothes home.
Oh.
So I think that's just the way the brain's way of trying to.
It's a very practical
kind of
approach.
I suppose it's like fight or flight, and you just go into survival mode, and you can just sort of speculate and determine and consider trivial details as a protective mechanism. And I remember the night before I found out he died, I went to go see Ludovico Einaudi in concert, who is a Italian pianist and composer. Magnificent music. And actually, he's got a song called Elegy for the Arctic, where he is playing a piano on an glacier that is cascading down the Arctic, and it's magnificent and spectacular.
Like I've seen that.
Yeah, it's a sonnet.
Yeah, okay.
And I remember when I was flying home, a lot of his music, which is very somber and sad and pensive, like accompanied that flight. And I remember thinking I was like flying over the earth on a horizontal plane, and my dad was like moving from earth to heaven on a vertical plane. And that somewhere in the sky we were like intersecting. And ever since then, his music specifically has been a big carrier of me through my mourning and through my grief and through my reflections of my dad's life and his death. And most of the music I listened to in the making of this book was enveloped in Ludovico Einaudi's material.
There you go. And so when you got home, I mean, you had to go through that, but you've told me that you found difficulty in finding material that helps you process it. Process the grief of losing someone to not just suicide, but losing someone close to you. Do you want to, maybe you could expand on that a little bit? And because that ends up being part of the driver for the creation of the book, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I still think there's a lot of opportunity for more material to come into the suicide bereavement space. Specifically because the textures of grief around suicide can involve emotions around shame, guilt, self-blame, abandonment, that are more specific to instances where a person chooses to end their life or ends their life.
Yep.
And so this can bring the circumstances of their death into question and into scrutiny by those family members who can become haunted by certain questions, which are specifically addressed in the book, such as, why did you leave me? Which the whale asks, did I do anything wrong? Grace pleaded. So there wasn't a lot of material to necessarily delve into these nuances of human feeling and human experience. And I mean, I've always loved picture books. They're the best because they bring words and images together, which are two individual communicative systems into play, and produce a third system. So you've got like the story of the words, the story of the pictures, and then the story of the integration. And I think artwork can do a lot of heavy lifting and can give expression to things which sometimes words cannot. So picture books become very accessible formats for all ages to navigate through things.
Yes.
And then by having animals, we can bypass a lot of the potential stigmas or obstructions that maybe human protagonists can have. And so what you have is a book that can be a resource that can support others in their healing, and that I hope anyone can find accessibility in because of how universal it is.
Yes.
And animals, are a part of our living ecology. And it's very easy for people to resonate with an animal protagonist because it sits outside of our own constructions of what does a human think or look or feel like.
So in the day-to-day, it's easier to let yourself be involved in the story, I think, perhaps, than if you were to be confronted by images that, could be quite triggering as well. Like if you're reading a book, also, I guess your elephant character, the main protagonist, doesn't need to be a man. So, because that could be a man or a woman, right?
Yeah.
You might have lost a parent. There's some alarming statistics around children losing parents before the age of 18, isn't there?
Yeah. 1 in 20.
1 in 20 people lose a parent before they're 18. And we're talking about extremely formative years where how do you learn to deal with that? That's something that I'm very thankful I didn't have to do, which then I can see why something like this is really quite useful.
Yeah.
A child can pick it up and they can read through it, and some of those things are real things for you, but they're questions that they might be asking themselves.
Yeah.
So
and those questions were, so I suppose with the book, it's a balancing act of developing a piece that has a narrative arc and adheres to the conventions of the genre, which is climax, resolution, character development within a very tight page count and an even tighter word count. But it has also been reviewed by many members of the mental health care community, children's psychologists, psychotherapists, grief counselors, Roses in the Ocean, which is a suicide lived experience organization, Jesuit Support After Suicide Services, which offers grief to people bereaved by suicide, a suicide bereavement researcher, and all of their feedback was baked into the manuscript to ensure that the words were non-triggering, non-activating.
Because that's a risky run, isn't it? That you could create something that is actually people find triggering.
Yeah, of course. And so that's why I did as much due diligence as I could. And there were 20 iterations of the manuscript. And every third...
How many?
20.
20 iterations?
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
That's devoted.
And that's not even like the visuals. The visuals had like 7 consecutive storyboarding developments and color palette studies, and
wow,
I haven't slept for like 2 years.
Yeah, I know. So you I don't think people realize how much work there is that goes into, dare I say, a picture book, a simple picture book. Yeah.
A friend once told me that Ernest Hemingway famously said, "I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long letter." Just in the intention that the more concise you make it, the tighter the edit is, the more headspace goes into consolidating what is the purest or the core elements.
Yes.
And then another challenge was removing causality. So like one of the initial pages, when my character Wanda asks, "Why did you leave me?" I had this beautiful download for response from the soul of the elephant that said, "I didn't leave you because I didn't love you. I left you because I lost the love for myself." Which I think for many people is the case. In situations of suicide, you lose self-love or you lose self-worth so much so that you don't believe your life has worth.
Yeah.
And for me, that was one of the biggest sadnesses about my dad, is that he didn't feel like his life had enough worth to continue living. And so that was a very true sentence for me. But then one of the social workers who reviewed it said, you don't want to draw causality as to why someone dies and make a correlation between someone not having self-love and someone choosing to end their life. So that was removed. And there was another line in the book, like when the children say, "Forgive yourself, Dad, we forgive you." But then again, the idea of forgiveness implies that there's a transgression. And there is no judgment in the book or in my own framework about life for one who chooses to take their life. Of course, there's always alternatives. But, like previously, we used to use, like when my dad first died, the phrase commit suicide was more frequent. And then here again, commit implies that there is a transgression of a sin or a crime. And so
the word commit.
Sorry?
The word commit.
The word commit.
Yeah.
And now we just say died by suicide or died through suicide.
Okay.
And so in that way, the line, although it's beautiful, "Forgive yourself, Dad, we forgive you," was also taken away. So the final manuscript is a lot more distilled and has so much that was taken out of it. And that's when the artwork comes in. Yeah. And, like the eyes and so my character's Wonder, and he's a humpback whale that's a calf. And so his eyes are filled with wonder and reverie. And Hope is very luminous, and as an emerald dove, she's glowing. And Grace is a swallow, and swallows are very aerodynamic and have got like stunning movements in their wings and their tails. And so it's just about finding other ways to articulate the characters and their resilience and their qualities and how they heal.
And I guess if you draw that in, I mean, they're not specific words, and you can sort of, I mean, people will interpret pictures how they like.
Yeah.
Whereas words easily misinterpreted, I guess.
Yeah. And I wanted the characters to each have like, you know, one or two syllables in their names, virtues, aspirational states.
Sure. It obviously carries a very deep meaning for you, and just hearing you talk about it, it shows just how much you've thought about this, because I think
obsessively.
Well, I think that's the eye opener for people, right? That they probably don't realize just how much thought and reiteration there is in creating something like this.
Yeah.
And removing the Ryan out of it considerably so that it can adapt towards other people. I like it. I think it's really nice. What was it? I mean, that 2016 is when you lost your dad.
Yeah.
But you didn't start working on it until 2020.
Yeah, 2020, 2021.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us what made you do that? Because I guess even in the word elegy, right, it can often be a reflection later. So in this case, it's very much so. Yeah. So do you want to tell us, like, what was the catalyst for you to even create it in the first place?
Sure. So I also paint wedding certificates.
Yes, you have a business.
Yeah, I've got a business painting Jewish wedding certificates and other bespoke pieces. And of course, during COVID, there were no weddings.
Yeah.
Or clandestine under 10-person weddings.
Uh-huh.
But I was working consulting at the time, and I wasn't commuting into work, and I found myself with a lot more free time.
Sure.
So I suppose my art making could become a lot more reflective of my life and its unfolding. And that's when I started to resonate with animal allegories. And, you know, there were many long nights of lockdown.
Yes.
Especially with our curfew.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that brought us in from 8 p.m. And it was like during a winter's night, I just, you know, I had all these fun ideas during the day about Dan the donkey and Gladys the goose and Skoma the snail. But then I started to think more personally and more intimately, what does my family look like and who's my family?
Yep.
And I started to think an elephant just felt like a fitting metaphor for my dad. You know, the elephant in the room, they're very sensitive beings. The herds are led by the matriarch, and the male elephants often leave the herd once they reach adolescence and become lonesome beings. My dad was like a lot more introverted than me and a lot quieter. And so I imagined an elephant walking across the stars, you know, kind of just like the soul of an elephant just walking along the firmament of the night sky. And then I did a drawing of an elephant walking out of its body.
Yeah.
You know, when something dies, or in a movie, or in typical media forms, when something dies, we imagine something floating.
Yes.
And to me, I sort of correlated floating with dying of a natural cause. But when something ends their life and there is that intention behind the action, they're walking.
Yeah.
And they're walking away from their body.
Yeah.
And so I did this drawing of an elephant walking away from its body, and then a whale, a lioness, and two birds just crying under the gateway of that ascension into the sky.
Yeah.
And then I realized that single image was much larger than a whale's tail and sort of sat in its own story arc and had a bigger purpose, because I remember even saying to my sister one time, I'm like, oh, I've got like elegy for an elephant and a whale's tail, and I'm one person and I'm still working. And she's like, I think an elegy for an elephant is more urgent.
Yeah.
And potentially more important.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, definitely more important. So
yeah. And so those long COVID nights induced the creativity juices a bit more. And, yeah. Well, I think so this is something that is important to note if you're not really an artist, is that true artists they can't not make art, right? It's a compulsion to make art. So eventually, in a time where you've got time, you're likely to start doing something.
Yeah.
And this felt like at the time for you an appropriate thing to be
Yeah.
doing, because it helped both. Well, it's scratching a couple of itches, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, the truth is, the calling to bring this work into the world became too overwhelming and too inspired to do anything other than not make it. At some point, I've recently just finished the book Ikigai about the Japanese philosophy of living a long and fulfilling life, and it's often about, or in Vedic philosophies, it's dharma, one's purpose, and sort of when you find your intuitive sense of why you're on this planet and you can access that, it just becomes so purposeful and so meaningful in your endeavor to realize it. And I mean, the initial stages of the book were very hard to do, especially when I was doing the manuscripts and I wasn't really drawing it, or
Sure.
because in terms of producing a picture book or writing a picture book, you write the manuscript first to make sure the flow works.
Yep.
And then you cascade the words across 32 pages or 40 pages. And then the placement of how the words fall determine what illustrations
It's going to go with it.
go on each page.
Sure.
And in the initial phases of making the book, I had to do a wide literature review of the materials out there and also realize the materials that weren't out there.
Yeah.
And I had to read a lot of stories about children who had lost parents and parents who had lost children all through suicide. And it was incredibly triggering for me and devastating and shattering. But as I moved through that process and moved more into the painting, which is where it's more my intuitive language, I just felt the universe was supporting me in everything I needed.
Right.
And I felt like I was being held by something much greater and something by the divine. And it was just very affirming. Like the book is painted with seawater from Aries Inlet, Cape Town where my dad was born, Sydney where we lived, Melbourne where I live. And I remember I was collecting some water from the Great Ocean Road and there was a grotto. And right next to the grotto, my name was engraved, obviously by a previous Ryan who had, wanted to make their mark on the passage of time. And then as I collected the water, a swallow flew above.
Right.
And, obviously being in Australia, it's not like I could have had a natural encounter with an elephant or a lioness. But it's just there were small moments that synchronicities lined up, and I just felt like you're on the path. This is right.
This is correct.
This is correct. This is exactly where you're meant to be. This is exactly what you're meant to be doing. And more of those moments populated towards the culmination of the book. And I remember like when I was painting the final backgrounds, which alarmingly only happened in March because it took so long. Actually, last year I did a course in visual neuroscience to understand how to do compelling illustrations and things that I hadn't really considered because I'd always done standalone artworks. But with the picture book, you have to think about the artwork as a cohesive series and how does the horizon line flow? And what does the horizon line establish in the viewer? And how do you create narrative mood? And what are your positive and negative spaces? And where does the text go? And what is the breathing space around the text? And what are your character expressions? And so there's a whole mythology of and meaning and materiality and everything that's just folded into the book. But
it's a whole lot harder than a single picture.
Yeah, absolutely. But towards the end, I just remember like the moonlight would stream through. I definitely feel a lot more connected to the cosmos, and I feel like my dad's spirit, and not only his, but all the souls that have left kind of sit in the firmament of the sky, which is one of the messages in the book. But I remember often thinking that I would just go into this flow state. And, I had Ludovico Einaudi playing, and I had all my watercolors spread out. And 4 hours later, I would just come out of this place that had felt so transporting and so transformative. And I would like reorientate myself and be like, where was I and what had just happened? And all these works are in front of me. And it was just like, it just felt so like, I was coming back into the sea of myself.
Right. It felt right.
Yeah.
It felt
correct.
correct.
Like a deeply spiritual, immersive experience.
It's similar to like a meditative state, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There are some I mean, talking about once you're done, I mean, the book has a big launch planned, obviously.
Yeah.
But we would talk about, like, we've touched on who you would like to help with this book. There are some pretty ordinary stats, like we mentioned before, and I've got a couple in front of me here. That 3,144 deaths by suicide in Australia in 2021. And that data has to catch up, obviously. So we've got 2021 data here.
Yeah.
But it's 3,144 deaths. That outweighs so many other things.
Causes of death.
Yeah, it's like it's one of the majors.
Yeah.
And yet it's probably one of the harder ones to talk about. There are many cancers. Cancers are a bit more public. People, like, there's more causes that are actively, chasing after the funding and things because it's a disease. Well, it's a physical disease, I guess. Suicide is not, I feel like it's a league of its own.
Yeah. What I've noticed in trying to pitch this book is that suicide is something we often whisper about.
Yes.
And I feel like it needs to be spoken about. I think suicide makes us feel incredibly uncomfortable because it, as mentioned earlier, calls into question the circumstances of that person's death. Like, ultimately, a few of the messages in the book is that no one is to blame.
Yep.
But I just think it's very confronting to consider that people lose the capacity or the stamina or the strength to continue living their lives and feel like there is no other choice. Like, in the beginning, there's a piece that says this book is for all those who left and for all those they left behind. And the truth is, every suicide devastates the community of the person who lived in it.
Yep.
It's kind of devastating how many people would connect with Elegy for an Elephant.
Yeah.
But also, it tries to be supportive in grief of all forms and talks about the ways we can connect to loved ones we've lost. And I think it also has a ability to resonate with anyone who's lost someone to any cause of death.
And there would be many.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously for all causes of death, but I mean, suicide alone, 65,000 attempts per year.
Yeah.
And whether you're successful or unsuccessful, you've still got to a point where you're at that point, which will have effects on families if they find out anyway. But, it's a lot. It's a lot of people who are getting to the point where living is an outweighing not.
Yeah.
That's a devastating sort of point to get to, isn't it?
Yeah. And also, like, the contemporary human experience is a lot different to what our brains were. The flight or fight response is so activated in everyday moments of our contemporary living. And I think, obviously COVID put people through a lot of stress and we are in a mental health epidemic at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would agree. Certainly COVID periods of lockdown revealed a lot of that.
Yeah.
People already had stress, and that was an extra one, and that was very much a tightening of the screws, a regular tightening of the screw, which it was never like personally, I felt like the big blows came occasionally, but it was the constant little ones that, just one extra thing that you couldn't do or one extra thing that happened in your world that changed, the whole experience.
Cascaded
and it just kept getting worse.
Yeah.
As opposed, I think when we went, I think when we went into lockdowns, we all assumed we'd come out as quick as we went in. You're going in next week, whatever, it's going to be this. But we kind of assumed when it's done, that's it, everyone comes out. I mean, I was even on a committee, we were going to organise a big party for when we came out of lockdown. But we didn't actually ever come out of lockdown. It was always tapered. It was a tapered exit. And that meant that you never actually really got to celebrate the end of it. You sort of it just wasn't there anymore.
Yeah. And it obviously left shadows.
Yeah. And some deep scars, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So do you think has the creation of this book, going through the process of this actually helped in the end? Has it helped you? Do you
Yeah.
think?
I mean, a lot of people during the process of it asked me, was it cathartic?
Yep.
I saw my psychologist frequently after my dad passed, and I still continue to do so.
Yeah.
I just think it's a good practice for mental health and mental health hygiene.
Yep.
So I don't feel like I had avoided dealing with my dad's death in any way. And, in order to really come back to writing the manuscript, I had to emotionally excavate everything again. I sort of envisage it like a riverbed. The sediments are settled, and then you have to go up and you have to agitate everything. And I reread his letter, and I reread all my diary entries from the time. And it took me to a darker place that I thought I didn't have a lot of mental energy to revisit much more. And so I was also writing the manuscript last year during winter, and the nights are shorter and it's colder, and I was reading a lot of these recounts of lived experiences of suicide that I connected with all too well.
Yep.
And so at that stage, many times I think I was just carried by something bigger than myself in the making of it.
Yep. Yep.
Towards the end, it just felt like I was basking in something incredibly special. And then a few weeks ago, I went to Bali. I lost my Bali virginity on what I call a Bali baby moon. In the period between submitting the final file and waiting for the books to arrive.
Oh, right.
So
right.
nearly at the end of it. But
Yeah.
so I was in Bali, and the last night of my trip, I was on the Gili Islands. I'd never been before. I felt like I'd done my Australian rite of passage to Bali.
Yes. Yeah.
And there was just this stunning starscape above. And then again, I saw an elephant crossing the sky,
Yeah.
And I had another beautiful download from the universe about a book that would either be an elephant's path or an elephant's trail. And although I'm going to need to take, I think for my own mental health, some space from
After this
book, a whale's tale will be more fun. And
Yeah.
but it just animated to me how alive my dad has become again in my life, even after his death. And I think that has been the biggest gift of the book, is that I've got such an active relationship with him now. There are certain animals that are so abundant in our visualscape. Birds, whales, dogs, cats, elephants. But, when your awareness is on something, you are much more acute in how frequently you notice it. But I just see elephants everywhere. And even if I don't always think that is him incarnate, it is a reminder of him.
Yeah.
And also just in following through with it, which is because I remember when I started Whale's Tale and then I started Elephant's Elegy, my friends were like, oh no, finish the first one.
Yeah.
Just to kind of be like, I can follow through with it. I can realize it. I can bring it to the world.
Yes.
And that sense of artistic realization is also just incredibly fulfilling.
Yeah. You've said that this is actually probably a good resource for maybe even kids as young as 7.
Yeah.
Depending on their parents, I guess, whether they're willing to delve into that sort of stuff. But kids that are that young might actually really get quite a lot out of this, being that it's a picture book. Yeah.
Yeah. And even here, one of the reviewers who, her name is Dr. Diana Sands, and she's the director of the Center for Intense Grief, and also has written a book called Red Chocolate Elephants about how to unpack suicide for young children, but it's more of a resource for parents. And it's has said that this book could be appreciated by someone who is maybe 4 or 5, depending on their level of emotional maturity and cognition and development.
Sure.
And so 7 was just a safe minimum age.
Yeah.
That the discussion with a lot of the mental health reviewers had all pretty much aligned on. And actually accompanying the book's release, there are going to be some education notes on the website for different age ranges, which my sister, who is a educational psychologist, has sort of written, and she's sort of taken that on. But ages 7+, the book prompts conversations that can be unpacked in safe spaces between parents and children, guardians, caretakers, carers, clinicians, teachers. And so I can see it sort of having a life in many settings, at home, in schools, in the psychologist's office. A lot of children's psychologists I know are like, we would love to have this in our practice. We would love to go through this in therapeutic sessions with the kids.
Yeah.
And so I think
really help them unpack it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And especially with that distancing of, you're not taking it away from them, but you're expressing it through, a bird or a whale.
Yeah.
So they can see the analogy in something else and then tangibly connect it to their own lives without it being dogmatic or didactic or prescriptive.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see without all those amazing fancy words that you just used, but I could definitely understand what you're trying to say is that it's a separation basically of the real, but the story is still relates to the
and
to
it gives
their
space for
individual stories.
interpretation.
Yeah, that's right, which they need because everyone's situation is a little or a lot different.
Yeah. And some of the beauty of art is everyone will have a different interpretation of a different of the same painting.
So Ryan, what do you got planned to celebrate bringing the book to the world?
Sure.
Once all the big shipments turn up safely.
Where are they?
Yeah. Where's the big shipments? Still haven't got the call, by the way. Since we've been sitting here. What are you planning to do to help? Share this with everyone else.
Yeah. Well, one of the wonderful things about a picture book is that you've got the artwork that surrounds it. So I was very fortunate and grateful to get a grant from the City of Port Phillip to have a art exhibition.
Oh, nice.
Which I've called The Elephant's Migration Across Picture Book Plains. And so the art exhibition runs from September 13 to 23 at Bright Space Gallery in St Kilda.
In St Kilda.
And I've got about 600 articles of paintings and drawings.
Oh, wow.
That have been used in the sequencing, storyboarding, ideation, creative development of the book.
So it's like a behind the scenes.
But, and look, it's a beautiful, gorgeous, light-filled room. But as a lot of people in sort of gallery curation told me, less is more. And so I've had to make a very rigorous cut.
Yep.
But what I'm going to be doing is sort of interspersing concept development storyboards, the final artwork, family photos, line drawings. And I've also worked with a great filmmaker, Max Roos, who has taken maybe 6 different shoots of footage over the past year and really chronicled the book's making. And there's also going to be an adjacent film that shows the making of the book and the opening up of the advances with my sisters.
Yep.
And I think that's a great opportunity for people to not only see the book, but to understand the process of making a picture book, which in of itself is a unique journey.
Yes.
And so the exhibition will kind of be a nice confluence of my family narrative, the story of the book's development and its realization and the artwork. And then next year, I actually want to take the book on a bit of a global tour. I want to go speak at mental health organizations, lived experience organizations, grief groups. In America, there's a huge network of camps called Comfort Zone Camp, which are running in every state, and those are specific to children bereaved by suicide. Time recently did a big article about it.
Oh, right.
And so, like I said, this book is incredibly unique. There's not a lot of literature out there. And so I want to sort of go share my story and go to the world and sort of,
give them the gift as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And it's not only, you are selling the book. Obviously, you've got a big shipment coming.
hopefully.
In theory. But you're also going to be donating some of the profits.
Yeah. So in Judaism, 18 means life.
Okay.
And so I've always kind of tried to be mindful of donating when possible and when feasible. And so 18% of profits of the book are being split between Lifeline, Movember, and Support After Suicide Services, which allocates apportioning to suicide prevention and intervention, but also suicide postvention and, supporting those who are bereaved by suicide. And so what that does is it allows the book, in addition to its own pages, allowing readers to feel seen and supported, to also contribute a portion of proceeds to doing the work that, please God, prevents future suicides and supports those who are currently bereaved by suicides.
Yeah.
And so, that was just always a really important element for me.
I think I like that because it's also, it's part of your purpose, right? Like, so using your experience to create something and then to do something useful with it in more than one way afterwards. So, I think it's really powerful, and congratulations. Like, I think it's really lovely, and I definitely suggest people check it out. Actually, what's your website? Can people go?
And actually I was going to say before, so in the process of self-publishing this, I had to come up with a self-publishing platform or
Why
name.
did you self-publish?
I self-published because often when you submit a manuscript for publication to a publisher, publishers, and rightly so, have certain guidelines or visions or ideas for what sells well, what, market trends.
Yep.
And this book took a huge toll on my mental health. And I just didn't have the, I suppose, stamina to tender it and submit it for publication and have to change its artistic shape.
Yes.
And have to conform it to fulfill what a publisher felt.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to reserve complete artistic and creative direction. I did work with an incredible art director and editor, Margarita Lamond, but ultimately I had the final say in everything, which was really lovely and really nice and very empowering.
Yep.
And so I want to do picture books with my life. So I came up with Narratives of Nature, which is going to be a space for stories of our human nature and the natural world, using animal allegories and botanical motifs. And, that's where a whale's tail will live and an elephant's path will live. And please God, in the future, Narratives of Nature could be a platform for other illustrators and other authors. I'd love to give them a voice for their own stories, if it's in resonance with the philosophy of human nature.
Yeah, okay. So people should go to, I'm looking at the words here, narrativeofnature.com.
Narrative with an S,
narrativesofnature.com. And I'll put the link into the
and
show
also on
notes.
Insta, Narratives of Nature.
Yep.
And I'm yet to put it on more platforms.
Yeah, sure. And if people want to find where to go to your gallery, where should they look for? Should they look on the same website?
Yeah. There's a tab for art exhibition details. The website's also got downloadable resources. It's got a mental health directory for bereavement, mental health crises. And the book also has that. That was very important for me to have. Just listing the most relevant organizations in Australia that are doing work that's really important in the space.
Yep.
The website's got exhibition details. It's going to have prints for sale, original drawings for sale. So if people connect with the book and they sort of want a piece of it on their walls,
nice.
They can live there.
So they can buy an original.
That's
ended up in the book.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's lovely.
Absolutely.
One of the 600 too.
You
might have a few like
yeah.
Oh, that's lovely.
Trying to get out the red.
Well, look, I wish you all the best with this. I hope that this book will find its way into the hands of the people who need it.
Thank you.
Because obviously it's important for starters that people get the help that they need in whatever way they can get it. Plus, you've put a lot of work into it. So, we'd love people to go and see it. So, again, that website is narrativesofnature.com. You can go and check out Ryan's work there and also get down to St Kilda.
Yeah.
Get down to the...
Come for a swim. I go for a swim in the bay every day.
There you go.
It's spring now.
Yep.
So weather's warming up.
It's starting to warm up. Maybe the bay will start to warm up.
Yeah.
With some...
Incy.
Yeah.
But that's what makes it exciting.
Yep. Someone else on this podcast, Dave McNamara from Food Bank, swims at Williamstown every day.
Okay,
he reckons he's a different man every time he gets out of the water.
Yeah, absolutely. And
worth doing.
Having, an inner whale and painting with seawater, it's sort of like, for me, it's just my daily ritual. It wakes me up.
Yeah.
Connects me to the waterways of the world.
Very good. Well, Ryan, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
For coming on to the Good People.
Chatting.
Yeah, it's been lovely to meet you. And again, this is something a little different for us here, but I think it's very important, the work that you're doing, because at over 3,000 effective suicides every year, there's a lot of people out there that the ripple effect will affect. So that's a lot of family members and a lot of kids who have got to try and work out what it is why it is, so thank you for sharing your story. It's very important, and we wish you all the best with your book, Elegy for an Elephant.
Thank you.
This has been the Good People podcast, and brought to you by In Other Good News. The guest today, Ryan, who's brought his book, Elegy for an Elephant. Thank you so much. We will catch you on the next podcast. You can head to iogn.com.au if you would like any more information. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. That helps us so much. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or something, download the episodes. All of that helps us as well. And tell your friends. Tell your friends, because that's the best way to get the word around.
Community.
Community is the key. So again, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. This has been the Good People podcast. My name is Andy, and we'll catch you next time.
Well, it's a tip of the cap, it's a pat on the back, it's a smile from ear to ear. They're the good people from round here. They're the good people from round here. Come on, let me introduce you to a few.